Bond was excited by her beauty and intrigued by her composure. The prospect of working with her stimulated him. At the same time, he felt a vague disquiet. On an impulse, he touched wood. Mathis had noticed Bond's preoccupation. After a time, he rose. "Forgive me," he said to the girl, "while I telephone to the Dubernays. I must arrange my rendezvous for dinner tonight. Are you sure you won't mind being left to your own devices this evening?" She shook her head. Bond took the cue, and as Mathis crossed the room to the telephone booth beside the bar, he said, "If you're going to be alone tonight, would you care to have dinner with me?" She smiled with the first hint of conspiracy she had shown. "I would like to very much," she said, "and then perhaps you would chaperone me to the casino, where Monsieur Mathis tells me you are very much at home. Perhaps I will bring you luck." With Mathis gone, her attitude towards him showed a sudden warmth. She seemed to acknowledge that they were a team, and as they discussed the time and place of their meeting, Bond realized that it would be quite easy after all to plan the details of this project with her. He felt that after all, she was interested and excited by her role, and that she would work willingly with him. He had imagined many hurdles before establishing a rapport, but now he felt he could get it straight down to professional details. He was quite honest to himself about the hypocrisy of his attitude towards her. As a woman, he wanted to sleep with her, but only when the job had been done. When Mathis came back to the table, Bond called for his bill. He explained that he was expected back at his hotel to have lunch with friends. When for a moment he held her hand in his, he felt a warmth of affection and understanding pass between them that would have seemed impossible half an hour earlier. The girl's eyes followed him out onto the boulevard. Mathis moved his chair close to hers and said softly, "That is a very good friend of mine. I am glad you have met each other. I can already feel the ice floes on the two rivers breaking up." He smiled. "I don't think Bond has ever been melted. It will be a new experience for him, and for you." She did not answer him directly. "He is very good-looking. He reminds me rather of Hoagie Carmichael, but there is something cold and ruthless to his—" The sentence was never finished. Suddenly, a few feet away, the entire plate glass window shivered into confetti. The blast of a terrific explosion, very near, hit them so that they were rocked back in their chairs. There was an instant of silence. Some objects pattered down on the pavement outside. Bottles slowly toppled off the shelves behind the bar. Then there were screams and a stampede for the door. "Stay there," said Mathis. He kicked back his chair and hurtled through the empty window frame onto the pavement. Thus concludes Chapter 5. Chapter 6. Two Men in Straw Hats. When Bond left the bar, he walked purposefully along the pavement, flanking the tree-lined boulevard toward his hotel a few yards away. He was hungry. The day was still beautiful, but by now the sun was very hot, and the plane trees spread about 20 feet apart on the grass verge between the pavement and the broad tarmac. They gave a cool shade. There were few people abroad, and the two men standing quietly under a tree on the opposite side of the boulevard looked out of place. Bond noticed them when he was still 100 yards away, and when the same distance separated them from the ornamental porte-cochere of the Splendide. I forgot to point out at the beginning that my French pronunciations are really going to be a mess, so I apologize to anyone out there who knows the correct pronunciations. There was something rather disquieting about their appearance. They were both small, and they were dressed alike in dark, and Bond reflected rather hot-looking suits. They had the appearance of a variety turn waiting for a bus on the way to the theater. Each wore a straw hat with a thick black ribbon as a concession, perhaps to the holiday atmosphere of the resort, and the brims of these and the shadow from the tree under which they stood obscured their faces. Incongruously, each dark, squat little figure was illuminated by a touch of bright color. They were both carrying square camera cases slung from the shoulder. In one case was bright red, and the other case bright blue. By the time Bond had taken in these details, he had come to within 50 yards of the two men. He was reflecting on the ranges of various types of weapon and the possibilities of cover when an extraordinarily and terrible scene was enacted. Pardon me. Red Man seemed to give a short nod toward Blue Man. With a quick movement, Blue Man unslung his blue camera case. Blue Man and Bond could not see exactly as the trunk of a plane tree beside him just then intervened to obscure his vision. Bent forward and seemed to fiddle with the case. Then, with a blinding flash of white light, there was the ear-splitting crack of a monstrous explosion, and Bond, despite the protection of the tree trunk, was slammed down to the pavement by a solid bolt of hot air, which dented his cheeks and stomach, as if they had been made of paper. He lay gazing up at the sun, while the air, or so it seemed to him, went on twanging with the explosion, as if someone had hit the bass register of a piano with a sledgehammer. When, dazed and half-conscious, he raised himself on one knee, a ghastly rain of pieces of flesh and shreds of blood-soaked clothing fell on him and around him, mingled with branches and gravel. Then a shower of small twigs and leaves. From all sides came the sharp tinkle of falling glass. Above and in the sky hung a mushroom of black smoke, which rose and dissolved as he drunkenly watched it. There was an obscene smell of high explosive, of burning wood, and of, yes, that was it, roast mutton. For 50 yards down the boulevard, the trees were leafless and charred. Opposite, 2 of them had snapped off near the base and lay drunkenly across the road. Between them, there was a still smoking crater. Of the 2 men in straw hats, there remained absolutely nothing. But there were red traces on the road and on the pavements and against the trunks of the trees, and there were glittering shreds high up on the branches. Bond felt himself starting to vomit. It was Mathis who got to him first, and by that time, Bond was standing with his arm round the tree, which had saved his life. Stupefied, but unharmed, he allowed Mathis to lead him off towards the Splendide, from which guests and servants were pouring in chattering fright. As the distant clang of bells heralded the arrival of ambulances and fire engines, they managed to push through the throng and up the short stairs and along the corridor to Bond's room. Mathis paused only to turn on the radio in front of the fireplace. Then, while Bond stripped off his blood-flecked clothes, Mathis sprayed him with questions. When it came to the description of the 2 men, Mathis tore the telephone off its hook beside Bond's bed. "And tell the police," he concluded. "Tell them that the Englishman from Jamaica, who was knocked over by the blast, is my affair. He is unhurt, and they are not to worry about him. I will explain to him in half an hour. They should tell the press that it was apparently a vendetta between 2 Bulgarian communists, and that one killed the other with a bomb. They need say nothing of the 3rd Bulgar, who must have been hanging about somewhere, but they must get him at all costs. He will certainly head for Paris. Roadblocks everywhere. Understood? Alors, bonne chance." Mathis turned back to Bond and heard him to the end. "Merdi, but you were lucky," he said, when Bond had finished. "Clearly the bomb was intended for you. It must have been faulty. They intended to throw it and then dodge behind their tree, but it all came out the other way around. Never mind. We will discover the facts." He paused. "But certainly it is a curious affair. But these people appear to be taking you seriously." Mathis looked affronted. "But how did these Bulgars intend to escape capture? And what was the significance of the red and the blue cases? We must try and find some fragments of the red one." Mathis bit his nails. He was excited, and his eyes glittered. This was becoming a formidable and dramatic affair, in many aspects of which he was now involved personally. Certainly, it was no longer just a case of holding Bond's coat while he and his private battle with Le Chiffre in the casino. Mathis jumped up. "Now, get a drink and some lunch, and rest," he ordered Bond. "For me, I must get my nose quickly into this affair before the police have muddied the trail with the big black boots." Mathis turned off the radio and waved an affectionate farewell. The door slammed, and silence settled on the room. Bond sat for a while by the window and enjoyed being alive. Later, as Bond was finishing his first straight whiskey on the rocks, and was contemplating the pâté de foie gras and cold linguisti which the waiter had just laid out for him, the telephone rang. "This is Mademoiselle Lynd." The voice was low and anxious. "Are you all right?" "Yes, quite." "I'm glad. Please take care of yourself." She rang off. Bond shook himself, then he picked up his knife and selected the thickest of the pieces of hot toast. He suddenly thought, 2 of them are dead, and I have got 1 more on my side. It's a start. He dipped the knife into the glass of very hot water which stood beside the pot of Strasbourg porcelain, and reminded himself to tip the waiter doubly for this particularly for this particular meal. And thus concludes chapter 6. Pardon me. All right, chapter 7. Rouge et Noir. Bond was determined to be completely fit and relaxed for a gambling session which might last most of the night. He ordered a masseur for 3 o'clock, after the remains of his luncheon had been removed. He sat at his window gazing out at the sea until there came a knock on the door, as the masseur, a Swede, presented himself. Silently, he got to work on Bond and his feet to his neck, melting the tensions in his body and calming his still twanging nerves. Even the long purpling bruises down Bond's left shoulder and side ceased to throb, and when the Swede had gone, Bond fell into a dreamless sleep. He awoke at the evening completely refreshed. After a cold shower, Bond walked over to the casino. Since the night before he had lost the mood of the tables, he needed to re-establish that focus, which is half mathematical and half intuitive, and which, with a slow pulse and a sanguine temperament, he knew to be the essential equipment of any gambler who was set on winning. Pardon me. Bond had always been a gambler. He loved the dry rifle of the cards and the constant, unempathetic drama of the quiet figures round the green tables. He liked the solid, studied comfort of card rooms and casinos, the well-padded arms of the chairs, the glass of champagne or whiskey at the elbow, the quiet, unhurried attention of good servants. He was amused by the impartiality of the roulette ball and of the playing cards and their eternal bias. He liked being an actor and a spectator, and from his chair to take part in other men's dramas and decisions. And when it came to his own turn to say that vital yes or no, generally on a 50-50 chance. Above all, he liked it that everything was one's own fault. There was only oneself to praise or blame. Luck was a servant and not a master. Luck had to be accepted with a shrug or taken advantage of up to the hilt. But it had to be understood and recognized for what it was, and not confused with a faulty appreciation of the odds. For, at gambling, the deadly sin is to make bad play for bad luck. And luck, in all its moods, had to be loved and not feared. Bond saw luck as a woman, to be softly wooed or brutally ravaged, never pandered or pursued. But he was honest enough to admit that he had never yet been made to suffer by cards or by women. One day, and he accepted the fact, he would be brought to his knees by love or by luck. When that happened, he knew that he too would be branded with the deadly question mark he recognized so often in others, the promise to pay before you have lost, the acceptance of fallibility. Pardon me. I enjoy this romanticized, oldie-timey take on casinos because every time I go to a casino, I think it's the worst place in the world. I can only, just Vegas casinos and Reno and those places. I'm always just like, I don't know. I enjoy the oldie-timey Bond view of casinos. So where were we? Yes, one must accept the promise to pay before you have lost, the acceptance of fallibility. But on this June evening, when Bond walked through the kitchen into the Salle Privée, it was with a sensation of confidence and cheerful anticipation that he changed 1,000,000 francs into plaques of 50 mile and took a seat next to the chef de partie at roulette table number 1.